Welcome to Dekom, Law and Disorder.
The views expressed on this podcast are Peter Dekom's opinions based on his legal experience, research, and academic work. The podcast does not offer legal advice. For any legal matters, always consult an independent attorney who can assess your specific situation. And now, on with the show.
Hi, it's Peter Dekom again. And today I'm going to do something that's probably a little stupid, but I've been known to do that. And my principal focus today is looking at Gen Z from a perspective of an older generation looking back at what the hell we've given them, what we've left this generation. And even though in my era we've had everything from the Vietnam War, drafting people to get killed, one of my best friends died on one of those riverine boats in Vietnam. And we've had, 911, we've had all kinds of nasty stuff happen. But I have to say that what Gen Z is going to, and I'll define what Gen Z is in a moment, is a much more interesting transitional period for them, because people who grew up in the duck and cover nuclear proliferation age, or the domino theory, communism spreads like dominoes if you let one country fall, or the notion of an Islamic takeover of Western culture and an attack, literally an attack on the United States back in 2001, an invasion of Iraq, which I've already discussed in earlier podcasts, which literally changed the entire landscape of the Middle East for all time. And we're dealing in an era where we just might be transitioning from a democracy into something less, maybe even a full autocracy. But let me tell you a little bit about what inspired this discussion today. It was very obvious, horrible political violence that resulted in the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk died at age 31, leaving behind a wife and 2 kids in an inexcusable act of political violence. But political violence appears to be part of our culture. And I don't know how to deal with it other than talk about a political culture. But there's more to it. And I admire what Charlie Kirk did, which is he didn't shy away from confrontation. He believed passionately in free speech, which I am exercising today. Hopefully there's nobody waiting outside my door to take me away. And that quality is a very American quality. No, I didn't agree with almost anything he advocated, but that doesn't prevent my passionate belief that he had an absolute right to say what he wanted without inciting violence, which he didn't, and basically to protect his rights as much as anybody else's rights to speak freely without fear, trepidation, and excessive amounts of security and fun drones flying around looking down at what's going on. We live in terrible times. I absolutely believe, and we'll go into this, I have gone into it a little bit in a discussion of Antonin Scalia's decision and the concept of originalism and its impact on the Second Amendment. I've already done a bit of that. But the proliferation of guns, long guns, this was the assassination was simply a long hunting rifle from yesteryear, not an AR-15. But there's no reason in the world that Charlie Kirk should have faced this fate. And so what I call Gen Z is the unsafe generation. And I'll go into that because it's a very important part of defining how Gen Z feels, what Gen Z wants, and I will apologize because I'm looking at it from the perspective of a much older person. My son is a millennial, and I have a drop-dead gorgeous granddaughter who's even younger than Gen Z. She's a little over a year. And I want her to grow up in a country, where women have absolutely no limitations on what they can do and what they can't do, and that she thrive in an open and secure democracy. I will say that today's world is defined by a number of variables, and I think first I'm going to ask you, What do you think a Gen Z is? Technically, demographers say Gen Z started in 1997 and ends somewhere between 2012 and 2013. It is typically a very short period for what is conceived to be a generation. In the past, generations have pretty much been limited or just defined in 20-year segments. That's not happening here. And I remember many years ago, I asked my son, who is a millennial, while he was working at his first job, to look back and say, what do you guys think, you millennials think, of the kids who are going to college today and graduating? What's going on? And he actually looked at me and said, Dad, I have no idea what they're saying. I don't even understand their vocabulary. We're in different worlds. And I think, wow, transition is the speed of change, what some people call singularity theory, might actually limit a generational definition to a meaningful 5-year cohort or less. So I'm sitting here trying to figure out who's in this cohort. Well, there's another grouping of people called Zillennials, who are individuals who are on the cusp, on the trailing edge of millennial definitions, and those who are Gen Zs who are at the older edge of that. Let's note that Charlie Kirk, at 31 years of age, was not a technical member of the Z generation. Nonetheless, if there's anybody on this planet who could be deemed to be a spokesman for that generation, definitely Charlie Kirk. And we've been watching, the sort of discharge and then return of a certain, talk show host and maybe other talk show hosts. We're watching the FCC the president threaten mass media and communications, and we're watching a Supreme Court that seems to still be hell-bent on supporting the president any way they can. All that notwithstanding, Gen Z is here. And they faced a whole bunch of things no one has ever faced before. We've never faced a pandemic in the modern world. This pandemic slammed into Gen Z as they were going to school, forced many of their schools to close, and a lot of the education to slip online to those who had adequate familiarity and equipment to deal with that method of education. We've also discovered, to our dismay, that we are living in an era defined as much by a new technology that seems to be one of the primary seminal changes in the entire world, called AI. And AI is a little baby technology right now with trillions of dollars being invested. I'd have to say the vast amount of which is going to be blown all to hell because this marketplace can't sustain that. But it is defining relationships, jobs, and all kinds of other stuff. Let's start with the proposition that 70% of those who fit into the Zillennial and Gen Z, and I'm going to sort of just use Gen Z as a generic reference to that grouping, basically have no faith whatsoever in either the Republican or the Democratic Party. Now that sounds strange because Charlie Kirk was a hero to the Republican Party, but what he represented wasn't straight doctrinaire GOP philosophy. What he was doing is saying, look, I got a generation of people that nobody's paying attention to or dismisses or figures they're going to learn it the way we learned it, the hard way, and I'm going to speak for them. The Democrats have no equivalent. No, AOC and Bernie Sanders are not equivalent. They don't have that kind of passionate following, and they don't actually go places where they're at risk and talk to the other side and debate. Yes, they may go on a talk show or whatever, but the Democratic Party is a little mired in old world media, whereas the Republican Party actually owns social media that reaches so many people. Charlie Kirk understood how to use social media, and that literally 50% of what Gen Z learns about news comes in snippets off social media. Snippets are a terrible way to try and understand the news. But we live in a high-paced, hyper-accelerating society with a group of human beings, the Gen Zs, who believe somehow they've been abandoned or ignored or marginalized. That's a bad place to start. And are they justified in that belief? And I'm looking at Gen Z as the future of America, but does America even have a viable future? We won't know for a while. We're facing an election in 2026, another one in 2028. Will we be a democracy where people can vote by that time? And not all the Gen Zs are going to be voting, but most of them will be eligible to vote. But in any event, they're the rising generation that is theoretically going to take over the country. And their attitudes and the attitudes of people who are older are profoundly different. Let's start with some of the challenges that they face that earlier generations may have faced, but to a vastly lesser extent, and in some cases, not at all. I think the number one issue is affordability. Going forward, can you even afford to live anywhere? Can you afford the rent? Can you afford to buy a house? And there's a uniform assumption that Gen Z will not live remotely at an economic and lifestyle quality that their parents and grandparents enjoyed. Upward mobility in the United States seems to be fairly dead. And the great leveler of upward mobility, education, is being trashed, decimated, and made even more unaffordable by soaring interest rates, which are basically transferred into student loans in a big time. And the current political situation does not forgive those loans and makes you pay them, even though the job situation, which I'll address in a moment, is abominable for Gen Z. We're in a very interesting transition. And Gen Z is basically saying, well, like most of America, only 35% of Americans still believe that a college education is valuable. That's pathetic. Literally when Hyundai was building a factory in the United States, they needed 500 workers. They couldn't find enough educated STEM workers to staff that factory. So out of those 500 workers, 300 of them were Koreans who simply overstayed their visa, getting the United States into a nasty confrontation with Korea, our ally, as we shipped them back. But the fact of the matter is, skill sets are necessary. But what are those skill sets? And you look at for-profit colleges, which have been traditionally a great nesting place of the great ripoff. We charge you a lot of money, and we don't really guarantee results, and we often go bankrupt and stick you with with an education that's unfinished. The best value seems to be community colleges if what you want are tangible blue-collar skills, because literally they teach, they're reasonably priced, and they're accessible, but there's been a massive cutback in education across the United States, both in federal and state programs. So those community colleges that give you the quickest education or training, I should say, to a good job are basically hard to find. They are underfunded. And frequently, students going to those schools, as well as other four-year colleges, particularly state universities and colleges, are unable to graduate within the 2 years for an associate's degree or 4 years for a bachelor's degree because they can't get the courses. There are too many people crowded in there and not enough people to teach those courses. So what exactly is the world a young Gen Z faces when it comes to a job? Well, everyone, you'll notice how we're bragging about how we've got so many jobs. Donald Trump brags about how we have amazing employment. Everybody's working. That's just not true. And if you happen to be just entering the job market, or if you have lost your job, you're basically facing double and triple unemployment rates that are reflected in the statistics. That means when you go out looking for a job and you've never had that permanence, you may have some sort of temporary employment or whatever, you're fighting a very big and nasty war. And it's kind of interesting. We have two kinds of unemployment that are becoming very problematical. And both of these diabolically impact Gen Z. One is if you can't get a job within 6 months, you are a long-term unemployed person, and your likelihood of securing a job drops as time passes. 26% of jobless individuals are what we call long-term jobless, that is, are out of work for 6 months or more. Now, you're looking at the fact that the unemployment rate is 4%. No, it's not 4% if you're Gen Z. It's more like 8, 10, 12, or even higher percent, because you're looking at places where people are staying in jobs. They may not even like the jobs they're staying in, but they're scared that if they quit, they'll join that long-term unemployed group where they're not like those gaps are never filled. When employers look at resumes and experience and whatever it is, if you have a long period of unemployment, that's a career killer. Women who take time off to have a baby and then go back into workplace find that their skills are no longer considered to be relevant, which is very, very unfortunate. But this employment statistic is a precursor to a recession which is going to hit the most vulnerable the hardest. And the most vulnerable ones are the people who don't have jobs who are looking, and that's a lot of Gen Zs coming on the marketplace, even with training, even with degrees, even with a background, and people who've been laid off believing that they're going to find another job quickly, who in fact don't. So let's start with Proposition 1. If you're Gen Z, no matter how well educated you are, you actually might not find a job. And a lot of those really high profile PhD level and professional level jobs that used to go to US government positions, well, you may have noticed something called a Doge, and it's not the ruler of Venice. It's obviously Elon Musk's generous contribution to the prosperity of America, except there are people being laid off. If you're a healthcare specialist and you're looking at disease control, a medical researcher, all the kinds of things that are fascinating to people who are actually in science courses in colleges, universities, and even at the associate level, all those jobs are kind of gone. And the people who used to have them are out in the marketplace with decades of experience competing with Gen Zs who are graduating and saying, hey, I'd like to do that. I studied long and hard for that. I spent a fortune for that, and I'm paying off the loans for that. But unfortunately, I'm competing with people who've been doing this job for 10 or 20 years, and no matter what else is said and done, I can't compete with that. So it's a very, very, very strange time to be a millennial looking for work. It's a strange time for any American to be looking for work if they've been laid off. And people are staying in jobs they absolutely despise because they fear the reality of the world if they step outside. But for Gen Z, that's almost the entire cohort. It's almost everybody in Gen Z. So that's number one. You don't even have a future because you can't figure it out and nobody's opening the door for you. Well, that's got to be cheery and refreshing and awful. A lot of Gen Zs are staying and living at home. They don't want to. Who wants to hang out with, dusty old parents like me? And when you really want to go out in the world and find your place in it. The other thing that a lot of Gen Zs who have been traveling are discovering is people don't like Americans anymore. I mean, they just basically look at us as the country that elected the person who's, nailing them with tariffs. They don't like us. They don't understand why we would elect such a person, regardless of the underlying reasons. We have these very powerful immigration vectors. I mean, look at, I don't know if you listened to the president's speech in late September at the United Nations, but it was an excoriation of our allies about their immigration policies and all kinds of stuff. And so when Americans travel overseas, and millennials, everybody used to travel. You graduate from college, if you could afford it, you put a backpack on and slum your way into somewhere else, and the people would welcome you and help you, et cetera. That's not necessarily the case anymore. And for those who are stitching Canadian flags on their backpacks, there are a lot of angry Canadians, saying you're usurping our culture, and it's just not appropriate. So this sort of malaise about being an American, traveling as an American, trying to get a job in an American industry, well, it's not the same. And since the Department of Education, which is rapidly being disbanded, made an announcement that, oh, those student loans that were deferred, they're not deferred anymore. So you can't find a job, but you're obligated to pay back those loans. And just so you know, a lot of those loans are subject to revisions, this was done in 2005, of the bankruptcy code that makes it a bitch for you to not pay and declare bankruptcy. There are all kinds of earnings requirements, all kinds of nasty things. And there's also this notion that if you work for an appropriate nonprofit, which included a government job, at the end of 10 years, that loan would be forgiven. That's being questioned. People are saying, well, maybe not. We want your money. It's okay, we need that money because we're cutting taxes for people who don't need taxes cut. But that's the way we work. So you look at Gen Z, and they're looking out at the world, and they're saying, who speaks for me? You know, I look at all these people who are on MSNBC, CNN, and even Fox, Newsmax, and whatever. I don't watch those. If they're trying to reach me through those media, you're not getting to me. And by the mere fact that those are your focus, your primary media to reach out to me politically, that tells me one thing. You don't get me. You don't understand me. So I'm going to huddle with my friends. We're going to circle our wagons, and we don't give a shit what you want or how you want to do it. You also look at difference in political opinions that go across many, many, many years. You know, you start with the fact that each generation has a salient event or period of history that defines that generation. I mean, people who were born during the Depression reacted very, very, very austerely over the years, holding on to what they've got and basically remembering how hard it was to try to live through that period. Well, most of those people are gone. They're past. The next generation, which are still, they're passing too, are people who had a clear vision of what their obligations and their love of country was. They responded to Pearl Harbor, 1941, with patriotism, zeal that was uniformly admired and accepted. Soldiers and sailors and airmen went, by the way, it was the Army Air Corps, went into Europe and Japan and crushed dictators who embraced racism, who embraced killing people they didn't like, and basically demonized in order to rise up. We killed Nazis. We killed Tojo's, Japan supremacists. We did a lot of stuff, but we came in, and then with the Marshall Plan after World War II, we rescued Europe. And Europe loved us. We even provided tanks and aircraft to what was then the Soviet Union, now Russia, and we saved their butt. And ultimately, we went to Germany, and unlike the World War I folks, we're actually reasonably accommodating to the Germans, who today are really close allies, maybe, to the United States. We built these alliances, we built and helped Europe, and somehow in the last couple of years, we just basically looked at Europe and said, it's your problem, screw you. Europe has looked back at us and said, America, you've made some pledges to take care of this little island nation on, which is basically China says is part of them, Taiwan or the Chinese Republic. And if, China invades them and you're obligated to defend them or defend the Philippines or defend Japan or other countries there, that's your problem. It's not part of NATO. We're busy dealing with containing Russia. We're here, and that's our big problem. In the meantime, there has been an amazing transition in two particular areas. One, socialism and communism are concepts which obsess probably boomers and the silent generation, maybe a couple of Xers, but for the most part, those concepts don't resonate as horribles to Gen Z. Number two, Gen Z doesn't look at lockstep support of Israel the way the United States has traditionally approached the support of Israel. They're looking at, okay, nobody's ever going to condone Hamas. Nobody's ever going to condone, the October 7th, 2023 attack on innocent Israelis and foreigners who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. as these Hamas soldiers exploded out of northern Gaza and started killing, raping, and taking hostages. Those were horribles. And when that happened, I think there was uniform revulsion at that event. And indeed, Hamas is a guilty party. It's been held responsible for war crimes, etc. But then a man with Trumpian autocratic tendencies named Benjamin, quote, Bibi, close quote, Netanyahu, and his right-wing coalition, which he had to put together because he couldn't go with his standard Likud power base, decided they were going to extinguish Hamas forever, which is kind of like trying to extinguish Antifa, because Hamas is much of a concept, a theory, an approach to life as it is a party. It's more a party than Hamas. Antifa is just, I don't know what it is. It's anti-fascist, so I guess if you want to kill Antifa, you want to support fascism? I'm not sure what that means. But at some point, we are in a different place. We are in a place where mass killing, starvation, forced migration of people from all the time, gotta move, we're going to attack, gotta move, going to attack. And hospitals and schools are being blasted. And millennials and Gen Z see that, and they're beginning to say, wait a minute, my commitment to Judaism or my Jewish friends, that's real. But it's not a commitment to Israel becoming a bully in the region and killing 65,000 human beings, of which maybe 10,000 may have links to Hamas, but the rest don't. So Gen Z is saying, hey, you know what? And this is a huge issue in those upper Midwest states where there are large numbers of people from the Middle East living, particularly Michigan and Wisconsin, in which they basically pushed the states away from the Democratic Party and were very seriously involved in dethroning an attempt by Kamala Harris to become president. Those issues divide us even more now. The starvation and the pictures of kids, the failure of Israel to allow, aid, medical and nutritional aid for Gaza, and ultimately the refusal to allow members of the press, other than their own people, into the area to report accurately, are basically beginning to piss off a lot of Americans, and more so younger Americans who don't understand it. And that means Gen Z. So Gen Z is being very, very anti-Israel, not anti-Judaism. They're anti-Israel, not because they hate the country per se, but because they hate what it's doing in Gaza. That's going to be a very interesting transition in the future, assuming the United States survives as a democracy, in terms of continuing to support Israel with military sales. That may end, and I'm not sure that Israel is aware that the rising Z generation is not their buddy. That's something that we have to deal with. Let's also talk about communism and socialism. By the way, most people don't even understand what socialism is. It's basically a system of government where theoretically the government owns all the stuff that is worth anything. Land, factories, they basically control it all. Unfortunately, we have a situation where the Republican Party takes as socialism anything that has the word social in it. And that's a very strange reality. A social program like public education, or maybe something like Social Security or Medicare, that's socialism. But every other Western democracy, every single one of them, has universal health care. They're not socialist. I'm trying to picture, Germany being socialist when they make Mercedes, Porsches, and BMWs. That's not very socialist of them. So when you look at these things and you realize that the labels that people have been using are obviously not resonating with Gen Z. They're looking at it. They read about what socialism means. I would say communism is probably still got a negative twinge to it because it's socialism by force with a privileged elite running everything. And that is not something that's particularly attractive to Gen Z. But socialism per se is something they're actually looking at, because if AI truly takes away those jobs, truly replaces the work that they went to college all those years to do, and there's no way for them to get jobs with a future or that pay enough money because AI is taking those jobs away, robotics are replacing even blue-collar workers on assembly lines in a big way, what's going to keep them alive? Where's their money going to come from? Is it going to wind up being universal basic pay? That's socialism. And believe me, that is socialism. And you're looking at things like, the United States is taking a 10% interest in chip makers, Intel. We're looking at it. Is that socialism? Well, it's kind of like how you get there by having the government take over companies and have control over their day-to-day operations. So Gen Z is looking at all this stuff and is asking the big question, what the hell is in it for me? And nobody seems to give a damn about me. And you know what? I like to say you're wrong, Gen Z, but I can't. I have to say that we as parents, grandparents, whatever we've done, we have screwed up. The other little bugaboo that Gen Z has is one which the Republican Party is fighting a major alienating losing battle. And that's climate change. Try to tell a Gen Z with a modicum of intelligence that flood, that incredible massive destruction of property from a rising river, that extraordinary damage from a litany of 4 hurricanes that slammed into the Gulf Coast, Florida, or even up the East Coast. Those aren't real. They're just temporary. They're going to pass. Try to tell that person that, those wildfires that have smoke and you can't breathe and they're destroying homes everywhere. That's just, it's transitional. That heat wave where all your friends are sweating like hell in the summer and you just I can't work out. I can't go play football. I can't do what I normally do because it's too damn hot. All those things are not real. And you look at places like Texas, which is as hoax-driven as anywhere in the world that hates alternative energy. But 60% of the power on sunny days in Texas comes from, alternative energy. And everyone said, well, even China doesn't use those damn wind turbines. Actually, that's not true. They probably have the most extensive use of wind turbines of any country in the world. And when people tell you clean coal is the way to go, there's no such thing as clean coal. And anybody in the Gen Z who has a modicum of background in this arena is acutely aware that that's a myth. The idea of drill, baby, drill, you'll notice that the oil companies aren't even building new refineries. In fact, they're shutting them down. And they're not spending a lot of money invested in finding new sources of oil and gas. They're trying to find ways to get involved in the alternative energy area. But in the meantime, they have an ally in Washington who's helping stop any attempt to build alternative infrastructure that supports, this kind of new green energy and shut it down. And if you watch the president's speech in late September, he excoriated anybody who thought alternative energy was viable. He told countries that were embracing alternative energy that you're killing your country, you'll never make it, you need to get back to fossil fuels. And I can guarantee you that Gen Z is listening to that and wondering who's going to take the burden of climate change for the future. Who's going to do that? Who is going to get hit hardest? Who's going to face the highest rise of temperature? Who's going to face the increasing intensity of those once in 100 or once in 1,000 year storms that now occur every year? Who is going to get, it's going to be us. Because the people who screwed us up by not doing this are our parents and our grandparents. They kind of missed the boat. And in the meantime, China is literally manufacturing half of the electric vehicles made on planet Earth as the United States is scaling back to have, gas-powered vehicles because basically the infrastructure that was started to have charging stations everywhere has stopped. Where you're having mass transportation by certain kinds of trains, super trains, it's being defunded. And Gen Z is saying, wait a minute, this isn't going to make much difference to people who are here living now, but it sure as hell going to make a lot of difference to me as I get older, as I go into the job market. I don't understand why I have to face huge natural disasters because my parents and my grandparents screwed up and pretended that this was a hoax when everybody knows it's not a hoax. Just look at the weather, look at the change, look at what's going on. It's clearly not a hoax, and they're not stupid. They get it, they know it. And they are the ones who are going to face the worst aspects of climate change. And they're not having kids. In fact, that's another very interesting dynamic that defines Gen Z within itself. There's a very interesting schism between men and women, boys and girls in Gen Z. Boys are becoming increasingly attracted to machismo, manliness, man up, and do things that basically, you're the strong sex, don't let the weaker sex, interesting assumptions, huh? Let you do and define what you are and where we're going. We're men. Women should go back and have babies and stay home and take care of them, which, by the way, was one of the messages of white Christian nationalists everywhere, and that included Charlie Kirk. Basically, women need to go back to traditional roles. Look at J.D. Vance. It's his flagship slogan. And if you look at it, the majority of college students today are women. The majority of law students are women. The number of people in medical schools are increasingly women. And that obviously means at some point decreasingly men. This is a very interesting schism. And as women work in the world and have advanced skill sets and are getting the cream jobs, and men are being relegated to blue-collar secondary jobs, or even blue-collar, a lot of blue-collar jobs are phenomenal, but there are a lot of secondary jobs where if you don't try to train yourself, that's where you're going to be. And that is increasingly attracting boys, whereas women are increasingly attracted to places where they get educated. How could that go wrong? Women are also saying, you know what? I don't need a man to make me happy. I could have a baby if I want, with or without a man, but I sure as hell don't need one to define who I am or limit me in my growth. I can be a boss. I can run a company. I can run a division. I can be an engineer. I can do a lot of stuff, and you're not going to stop me. And a lot of young males are saying, well, wait a minute, I don't like that. So there's a huge disconnect, a lot fewer marriages, and we're seeing a profoundly declining birth rate in the United States, which, by the way, is mirrored in industrial countries everywhere. But we're really having a terrible birth rate problem. Replacement value is 2.1 babies per couple. We're at some place around 1.6, which means our indigenous population is shrinking, and Gen Z has no particular stake in seeing that population increase, no matter what J.D. Vance wants to have happen. The reality is, by the way, J.D. Vance's wife was a major lawyer and very successful in her practice. She gave it up to, take a secondary situation with J.D., but ultimately, she's a powerhouse, brilliant woman. And when you look at how that goes, if you are looking at a political battle between women and a government who women who have aspirations, and a government that wants women to slide back into traditional roles, and men who are saying, you know what, I want that traditional role. I want to be the guy with the big muscles. I want to bulk up. Football, which was failing and falling through the cracks, has suddenly found a brand new audience. And Gen Z is a big part of that, and young males are part of that ascension of the NFL. So as we look at all these transitions, all these changes, we're watching Gen Z turning on itself. We're watching the older generations kind of saying, your problem, we're not doing anything about it. And we're looking at an economic reality where opportunities are no longer generally available, even if you work your ass off, even if you spent a fortune on your education, even if you are at the top of your class. There are PhDs graduating from universities who can't find stuff. We have a label for them. We call them baristas. And even baristas aren't finding lots of employment along the way. So we have a very interesting problem. And I wish it were kind of nice, But it isn't. The other thing that you're seeing that we're completely ignoring, and why I call this Gen Z the unsafe generation, is because we have reached a point in the United States where bullets are the number one source of death for teens and children. Think about that. We so treasure a misinterpreted version of the Second Amendment that we're willing to let our children die in mass shootings. We're letting our children grow up, and this is another definition that Gen Z that differentiates them from other generations. They grew up in schools with active shooter drills. Huh? Yep. And it turns out the active shooter drills have come in real handy because there have been a lot of active shootings. And people who are trained in active shooting drills to have lower fatalities than those who are not. But imagine you go to a school. We old, folks in the boomer generation had duck and cover in case of a nuclear explosion, like that was going to work. But what do you do about somebody who walks in with an AR-15, which is basically a modified machine gun that used to be standard issue for SEALs, when it was not modified, and they have a magazine with lots and lots of bullets, and they have the ability to fire those bullets so fast, whether you have a bump stock or whatever else you're using, you can use that weapon to kill multiple people in literally a minute. Even if you have a knife and you're a nasty slasher, you can't kill people as fast as you can with an AR-15. Uvalde, all the stuff that happened in a lot of schools from Florida to, Colorado, et cetera, dead children. And, we did have a ban on assault weapons that expired in 2004. And right now, there's a large contingent of people that are saying, you know what? We're willing to sacrifice our children. And that primarily means Gen Z and younger. If we can keep our guns and we can use them with very few checks and balances, we don't like all these restrictions. Everybody should be able to carry a gun, put it in your holster that you've got on your body. You can have concealed weapons. You can carry them openly in so many states. And the gun marketplace was so free and open in the United States that all these lovely cartels in Latin America were buying great weapons and smuggling them south. Turns out that somewhere north of 70%, and I will even go so far as say 90%, of the weapons that are used by the cartels in the narcotics trade are American made. In fact, there were manufacturers in Connecticut and Massachusetts who put little token symbols on weapons that were heroes, banditos from ancient times or old times, on the weapons in celebration of those anti-heroes. Well, that's terrific unless you happen to be someone who is going to be a recipient of one of those bullets. It's not something that anybody in older generations even seems to give a shit to do. You get people saying stupid stuff. The only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. What happens when a good guy turns into a bad guy or loses their temper? And everyone's saying, well, it's mental illness. Nice try, but that obviously by the time they're pulling the trigger and killing people, they're mentally ill. But how would you spot that in the general public? Kids are basically saying, you're not listening to us. You don't care about us. And other macho guys are saying, okay, I'm going to get me a gun. I'm going to learn how to use it. I'm going to carry it around with me. I believe in the gun culture. Really? We're the only country not at war that has a gun homicide issue. Huh? We don't care if our sons and daughters and granddaughters and grandchildren die by gun, as long as people have the right to keep them. And people say, you take my gun away, I'm going to fight you. Well, I hate to say that, but what if that gun were taken from you, borrowed from you? I mean, most of the killings of people dying by bullet is from guns readily available in their immediate household. Why is this so important to us? We lived without it from literally 1994 to 2004. Nobody protested this assault weapon ban. But today, we don't care if our kids are going to die. So we have other crazy things going on. Our children, our Gen Zs, older children for that matter, are being told that medicine is quackery and that quackery is medicine. Now there's this report that Tylenol will cause autism. There isn't any credible medical evidence to sustain that. And there's a 20-year study in Sweden, for example, with a lot of medical doctors that proves remarkably to the contrary. And global medical associations said, no, Tylenol doesn't cause autism. But you're getting a lot of crazy things. Oh, if you get a damn COVID vaccination, it could kill you. So could, walking down the street. But the COVID health rate and recovery rate is spectacular. Meanwhile, we're cutting research to stop preventable diseases. And guess who's going to get those preventable diseases in the future? I won't be dead. I will probably be killed by one of those preventable diseases. But the people who are going to suffer the most are people for whom research has stopped on diseases that will develop into the future that could have been prevented. And who is that? Oh, it's Gen Z again. Screw them. They're going to die from bullets. Don't worry, we're not going to cure them with medicine. We're trying to get rid of Medicaid. We're trying to get rid of any form of supported medical service. We hate universal health care. And who's going to get killed or maimed or suffer through all that? Oh, it's mostly going to be Gen Z. The old folks are going to die off anyway. Who cares about us? But Gen Z, why are we basically putting them in a place where they're going to face death that's completely unnecessary? Why are we doing that? These are our children, our grandchildren. These are our friends. And the other thing that's really strange, we're demonizing people with different sexual preferences, LGBTQ plus, etc. Why? Why are we doing that? Most of the kids that are in college or went through school know somebody who's a gay, non-binary, in transition, and they don't hate them. They don't blame them. I mean, I'm trying to figure out a military group of LGBTQ going with rifles, shooting people up. They don't do that stuff. It's kind of like saying, okay, we're going to have these terrorist nuns go out and shoot people because they're wearing these black robes and they clearly have evil on their mind. Come on. Let's stop demonizing people. And that's another thing that I think Gen Z finds problematical. People in political positions in high places are demonizing their friends. And I think a lot of what they're seeing is soldiers march in streets, things that we never, ever, ever saw, are shaping a generation to make them fearful and take away their opportunities and marginalize them. Well, the way I look at it is we don't communicate with each other. The thing is called the Gen Z stare, where people just look, or when they answer the phone, they don't say anything. They wait for the caller to identify themselves. I think what we really have is a profound collapse of intergenerational communication. I think, older folks don't understand Gen Zs, and Gen Zs don't understand older folks. And the reality is we are people. We're connected culturally. We're basically united. So I have a different message for older people, which is listen to the younger folks. And a message for the younger folks is stop blaming people, get off your duff, and have a voice. Be powerful, take risks, open your mouth and say things that are worthy. Do not outsource your opinions to people who have a huge agenda that you can see transparently of what they're doing. Have your own damn voice, make your own damn research, learn what they need to do, and say it. Get politically active, get socially active, do what you got to do. And for adults who have these children, support them. Understand how you screwed up and skew your vote, not so much as what I want, but you have a responsibility to your children and grandchildren to vote for something that makes their lives better. Everybody, stop blaming and take responsibility and do something. Each demographic segment has a different job to do in recreating a communication among all of us. It's profoundly obvious. I mean, as you look at the last election, Trump embraced social media and the Democratic Party didn't. Who won? I think each side needs to understand what the other side uses for communication and reach out and try stuff. It's crazy, but sitting down and talking to someone face to face actually is not so bad. And if you have a difficult communication with your parents or vice versa, say, look, I don't know how to talk to you. How do I reach you? How do I talk to you? What is it that I'm saying that's pissing you off? Each side needs to reach out, embrace the communication techniques of the other generation, and try as much as possible to do some face-to-face stuff. It takes effort. You got to try. You got to understand the fears of older people and the fears of younger people on each side. And it is sides, unfortunately. It shouldn't be. We're families. We should be talking about the same stuff. Getting together and caring about each other, looking at your parents, looking at your children and saying one simple phrase and then acting on it. I love you and I care. Let me say that probably the number one quality that we have to foster in all people of different generations when dealing with each other is the ability to listen without being judgmental. Let the other person finish. Understand their hopes and fears. And you're going to take risks. That's no way to stop that. And there are more risks today than there were before. But to think that, living better is simply a measure of your material wealth may not be the right way to look at it. When you wake up in the morning, and if you have a little dog jump on your lap or something, and you look down at that dog and say, oh my God, I love this dog. I got a cat, whatever it is, or I have a best friend. I can't wait to talk to them or share an experience with them. Go out in the world. Experience the world. Go take a walk in the park. Join a club. Take a class if you're already graduating in something and meet new people. Listen. And then find a path that you're comfortable with. And understand, you're going to fail at things. That's okay. What's not okay is not trying. And one of the problems with your parents, Gen Z, is a lot of them have fallen into a complacent situation where they don't want to rock the boat. And by doing that, unfortunately, you have become expendable. That's not acceptable. And I want my peers and my generations and the older generations to wake up and understand what you're doing to folks. Each side has to try. Each side has to listen. And there are still going to be paths to glory. They just may not be defined in exactly the same ways they used to be. And for a lot of other younger people, think about starting your own business. Find something that needs to get done and do it well. Just understand right now, when we're talking about economic issues, political issues, or whatever else we're dealing with, everybody in the United States is afraid, except for those who are the billionaires and richer folks. Have you noticed that there are a lot of, gated communities? New York City, we call them, the concierge will not let you in. But we didn't used to have those. There didn't used to be gated communities of houses where people who aren't basically millionaires are living just because they're scared. But I have to say something to all you Gen Zers, maybe Zillennials, and maybe younger. My generation, and I'd say everything from older millennials, X, boomers, and the silent generation, we screwed up. Not a little bit. We really screwed up. And I can't speak for everybody in my generation, but I know that most of my peers who have children who are in one of these amazing generations, we feel bad about the world we left you. We feel bad that we didn't solve the climate change crisis, that people in our generations were basically creating justifications to allow big corporations to pollute and add fossil fuel, greenhouse gases into the world. We did that. We made decisions. We didn't fight hard enough. We also did something else. When I was coming out of the university arena and law school and all the other things, the hot jobs were to be investment bankers and be in financial fund managers. Well, those people did very well. I chose a stupid route. I wound up as an entertainment lawyer. But the reality is those people became the corporate mavens, and those who dropped out of prestigious universities, I'll count Harvard as prestigious for now, Stanford, et cetera, were creating mega wealth. And what you wound up doing is that people made a lot of money based upon buying, selling, and valuing as opposed to creating something valuable to society. We weren't feeding people. We weren't creating better homes for people. We were creating better weapon systems and better corporate financing vehicles. So I have to say this, Gen Z, Zillennials, and younger, on behalf of many people that I know, I'm so damn sorry what we did to you. And we did it. We did it to ourselves, but we at least had a vote and the power to change. You're kind of like victims without representation. And I'm so sorry. We did that. And I have to say that the honesty I get from Gen Z is refreshing. And I have gotten to the point where unless I have a long-term standing, trusting relationship with someone, the mere fact that they're in my generation, I don't trust them. They're living lies. We're all scared shitless here. We're all worried about what's going to happen. And the reality is a lot of not so good stuff is going to happen. So let me go back and try to ask you, I'm trying to define the parameters that differentiate Gen Z from other generations. And I could be wrong. But part of this is for you and Gen Z and to come back and challenge me. And for those of you in other generations to try to understand what you've done to people like Gen Zers who are basically looking at the world saying, okay, I can't afford a house. My rent's soaring. I absolutely don't know if I'm going to be AI'd out of existence. I'm looking, if I'm a male, I'm looking at redefining my role because women are dominating universities and a lot of the jobs that I don't want to do anymore. But if I get a job as a plumber or an electrician, I'm going to make money, or a welder. I'm going to make more money than a lot of my white-collar high school graduates or college graduates. And you're looking right now at a full frontal attack on our best research universities going on in the United States. I don't know how to tell everybody this, but if you think this country is going to create new jobs and we're cutting off the people who are inventing new technologies, or we're focusing those new technologies only on military stuff, we ain't going to be able to compete with China. We're doing a laydown and China's running past us. That's not what I always envisioned. So I'm sorry, Gen Z, we did this to you. I think part of this is an understanding that Gen Z is fractionalized in a number of ways. You have extreme religiosity, which we've never seen before. We've watched that religiosity kind of started like 15, 20 years ago at about 80% of the population identifying a religion. And the last 2 years, it's stagnated and it's stabilized at 46%. But there are a lot of very, very, very passionate people in Gen Z looking at Christianity, Judaism, whatever their faith may be, and grabbing onto it as sort of a way to have hope. But ultimately, and I say this rather bluntly, get off your duff. If whatever you believe it, but understand if you want change, you're going to have to get along with people that maybe you don't see eye to eye, but pick the things. If climate change is your thing, it's a big thing. If having rich corporations making all the decisions, if having an oligarchy where if you don't have money, you don't have a voice, if that's your thing, get all over it. Remember you may or may not remember that we had a Occupy Wall Street thing back in 2011. And we're watching right now the rise of socialism among a large number of Gen Zs. What the hell is socialism? To people who are in Boomer and X, et cetera, generations, the word socialism is like saying, eat turds. It's just horrible. Why would you ever want that? Because we grew up fearing all the things that socialism meant, and we conflate socialism with communism, which to me is forced socialism with a powerful elite calling all the shots. That differentiates it from socialism. You also see, Madani in New York, who is a democratic socialist, just like Bernie Sanders. And he's basically saying, oh, look, do you want to make the world better for rich people, or do you want to make the world better for everybody? And if you're going to make the world better for everybody, how do you do that? What are the things that you have to make better? And if you keep doing things like having the largest tax cut for rich people in the history of the United States, which adds $3 to $4 trillion to the deficit, you don't understand. Every year when the budget is there, there's a large component of interest. And that interest, you pay taxes. And the more interest you pay and the bigger the deficit, the more you give money away to rich people. It's basically middle class and lower class people subsidizing the mega rich. I'm going to do a thing on money, mythology, and madness later in the series. But we need to understand that Gen Z is the hope. We don't have anybody else who can do what you do. Yeah, millennials have a role in this too, zillennials in particular. But you, Gen Z, have more power because you have no voice right now. You need to find the voice. You need to stand up and yell and scream at those who are trying to govern your life in a way that you would not choose. And you know AI is a problem. So what are people doing to AI proof themselves? A lot of Gen Z are doing, they don't call them side hustles, but they find ancillary ways to make money. Buying and selling and trading assets. A lot of people are playing with crypto, dangerous world. But they are finding secondary ways to make money as opposed to primary occupations, which used to be the standard linear way to go. You'd go to college, you'd graduate, and that college degree would open a door for you. Now you reach for the door to open it and it's locked. Or people are saying, you know what? I think you should be a barista. Does it matter that Starbucks just shut down 1,000 stores? Where do you go? What is your safety net? And people who are in their 60s and 70s are asking the same question. You know, I saved and now my money is gone one way or another. We're all facing the same thing. So if there's a unity among generations, those who are not mega wealthy, we have something in common with Gen Z. We've already screwed up. Now we have to live with what we've done. You, Gen Z, have the opportunity to make a difference. Have sympathy for those who are grandparents or parents of yours, but the battle now shifts to you, and I have to say millennials too. You have to do it. It isn't going to get done for you. Fairness is, people say, well, that's not fair. Life isn't fair. It isn't going to be fair. So you need to figure out how to deal with unfairness and tilt the stuff in your direction. Let's talk about a lot of things that go over here. Charlie Kirk's death was ridiculously horrible. Political violence, and by the way, I hate to tell you this, Gen Z, but Gen Z is much more supportive of political violence than any other generation in history, according to Newsweek magazine. And they cite all kinds of nasty statistics, and that it's okay to get violent if the society you're in is not providing a fair opportunity for you. But 20% of Gen Z say violence can sometimes be justified in order to achieve political aims. That's compared to 14% of millennials, 8% of Gen X, and 3% of the silent generation and boomers. You are feeling bad. Anyone who sits there and says, you know, I support political violence can't be feeling good. And if you're basically, even though it's not a huge percentage, you know, a bullet coming out of a gun, especially in the AR-15 where it will never be a single bullet, you are basically looking at something that is really life-challenging, life-changing in a very bad way. And, you know, we had a decision, I think I talked about it in an earlier podcast, Heller versus DC, Antonin Scalia in 2008, in which for the first time in American history, the Second Amendment, for the first time, was reinterpreted to mean gun ownership is fine and you can't stop people from owning guns. And you look at the people who died in the school shootings. You know, I grew up, we didn't have active shooting drills. We had other kinds of stupid things, but not active shooting drills. And it's strange. Having active shooting drills has probably saved a lot of lives. But why the hell do we have them? Why can't older people understand that if you have a knife, you can't kill as many people than if you have a semi-automatic rifle? By the way, the AR-15, when it was in full automatic mode, was standard issue for Navy SEALs. So if you want to understand how powerful those weapons are, that's what it is. I'm so sorry about all this stuff. What's also going on is as you're facing the world, as you're dealing with credit cards and credit, you're dealing with rent and whatever it is, Gen Z has seen the largest credit score, FICO score, whatever you want to call it, of any generation in recent memory. You're getting decimated. You can't afford stuff. And now you're being punished because you can't afford that. And making payments on time, managing a whole bunch of payments, et cetera, is not something you can just, I'll do it. I know that. And you know, how much of your credit are you using? The more credit you use, the more your balance, your credit scores drops like a stone. So it's very interesting. If you talk among other Gen Zs, what are you doing when you're having those what if conversations? Where's job security? When you get a job, and now you're looking at a situation where during the shutdown, President of the United States is saying, I'm going to, punish any Democratic-leaning governmental agency and fire all the people. I'm picking up, Project 2025, which I claimed I didn't know anything about, and I'm implementing it. So one of the reasons you're seeing a lot of young males going into the trades is that those are jobs that AI isn't likely to take away from you. If you're installing a plumbing system in a new build, the AI is going to come in and say, well, I can do that better. Yeah, they're robots. There's all kinds of stuff there. So 65% of Gen Z believe a college degree alone will not protect them from AI disruption. That's very different from prior generations who didn't see robotics and automation as replacing their jobs. And 53% of you Gen Zers are basically looking at blue-collar or skilled trade work, and 47% are eyeing people-centered professions like healthcare. That's a big shift. You're also looking at people, women are saying, hey, I don't need a man showing me his muscles. I don't need a reservist Major Pete telling me I got to look this way or do that. I'm self-sufficient. If I need sex, I'll get sex. If I want to have a child, maybe I don't need a husband, but I'm going to put my career first and I'm going to work harder. That's very threatening to a lot of young male Gen Zs. The idea of having babies is scaring everybody. And yet, just a little tidbit here. Let me give you a little tidbit about demographics to understand population growth and what's going on. And this is maybe one of the greatest indices of fear that you can actually imagine. To have society have the same number of people, the indigenous population needs to have 2.1 babies per couple. The United States is currently at 1.62 babies per couple. Not that people measure whether you need to be a couple to have babies, but ultimately what it tells you is that our population is contracting. One of the great equalizers of contracting populations is immigration. But we're cutting off people to immigrate. Not only are we cutting off people who have advanced degrees, we're cutting off our immigrants who do the kind of manual labor that no American will do. And all those things are dropping the population through the floor. And if the population continues to contract and we do not have immigrants to replace them, understand that the economy cannot continue to grow because 68% of our economy is generated by consumers. And let me put it really simply. If you have fewer consumers, they're going to consume less. And you'll look at statistics out there and they'll tell you that, consuming is just fine. We're holding steady. And we're not. What's happening is the people at the top of the food chain are spending 87% of that consumer money. And in my money segment, we'll discuss all these things and how they impact and go together. But as you Gen Zers and us who are other generations look at this, you need to do what you're doing. which is to rethink ground up life. Let me say that Charlie Kirk's passing, disgusting political violence, is a very interesting take on Gen Z. It's only a minority. MAGA is not the majority of the United States. If anything, it's around 30%. And clearly, Charlie Kirk did not speak for most people who were in the Gen Z or Zillennial group. But he did have some things which are extraordinarily admirable, and I would hope that we all take this into consideration. If we don't have free speech, if people in government are going to say, okay, we're going to arrest all our opponents or make their lives living hell, this country is over. And your opportunities, Gen Z, are over. Because an autocracy will tell you what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And you won't like that. So we need to get together and talk with a unified voice to keep this as a democratic, open group. And we need Charlie Kirk's message of free speech, which he fought for, to continue. Even if I don't agree what he said, I sure as hell agree with the fact that free speech is a mandatory part of our survival. And if there's anything that you and Gen Z can do, do it. I'll tell you a little tidbit here. Anybody who makes an argument using anecdotes, you show terrible things happening. This guy got robbed in the middle of the street. If you determine your decision as a societal voter based on an aggregation of anecdotes, you are being misled. The reason people use anecdotal evidence is when they don't have the statistical evidence that actually tells you how the world is really changing. And when you outsource your opinions to third parties, whether they're political parties, religious parties, or whatever, take one more step. And instead of looking at the label, instead of looking at the mandate, look at what gave birth to that mandate or that interpretation. Make up your own damn mind. Look for the truth. And if anything I'm trying to do with these podcasts, I'm trying to drill down on facts. And the more facts you got, the better off you are. You can ignore them, but at least you know what they are. If you are destroyed by facts you didn't know about and you could have known about, that's your fault. Anyway, I really care about what happens to the rising generations. I really care what happens in the United States. We're hitting the 250-year mark, a quarter of a millennium. And I would like to think that somewhere hope is going to rise. And the only place I see hope being really solidified is with Gen Z. As I said, I don't really trust people my age. We screwed up so badly. We made so many dumbass decisions. You guys, you can redefine the world. And it's not just redefining it for you. Redefine it for me too. I'm Peter Dekom, and I hope you take that seriously. Until next time.
If you would like to give feedback, suggestions for new topics, or have a question that might be selected for a future podcast, please email us at dekompodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Until next time.